Hello, today we are going to continue our discussion about memory by taking a look at ways in which we can use memory research findings to help us to learn and remember more effectively. This part of our discussion can help you to become a better student, a more effective learner, and I'm hoping that you will be able to apply this information not only in our class, but in other classes as well, and apply this information now and in the future. So one way in which we can improve our memory is by using what's called the spacing effect. This very simply involves spreading out or distributing over time our study efforts so that we can come back and review things that we're learning repeatedly over time, helping ourselves to strengthen memories of that information so that we will be able to more effectively retrieve that information at some later time when we need to do so. We can contrast this kind of distributed practice with massed practice, also called cramming. We've probably all done cramming at one time or another, where we may stay up late the night before a test, trying to catch up on our studying and to get ready to take the test. It might help us to survive the test, but we're not likely to remember the information very long because we really haven't given our brain the opportunity to process and store the information over a period of time through distributed practice, which seems to work more effectively. Another way in which we can improve our learning and memory is by using the testing effect. The testing effect very simply involves asking yourself questions and seeing if you can answer the questions. In our course, we use the testing effect in some different ways. Sometimes we ask ourselves questions during class and we see if we can answer them. When you are learning new material in our class, if you use the study questions that I provided you with and ask yourself these questions as you're beginning to read and study uh, new material, it can actually help you to be able to learn and retain new things that you're learning more effectively. We can also use this effect in our studying when we get together with other people, and we can take turns asking one another questions and seeing how well we can answer those questions. This is a much more effective way of studying than just rereading notes over and over again, but not really having the opportunity to process it, what it is that we're learning, and ask ourselves questions to see if we can answer those questions. And that involves a kind of memory called recall memory. You may also recall from our earlier discussion that when we're sleeping, this is a time when our brain actually processes and stores memories for us. So studying and then sleeping on it over and over again through distributed practice, the spacing effect, in combination with the testing effect, can help to improve our understanding and retention of information. And finally, we need to make new information meaningful. An important way of making new information meaningful is to be able to relate new things that we're learning to things that we already know or have experienced. This is one of the reasons why I love to use examples in learning about uh, new information in our class. And this is the reason why I ask you to write reflective writing assignments where you relate things that you're learning in class to your life in some personal and meaningful way. When we do that, we're making information meaningful. Let me also add that another way of improving learning, memory retention, is to teach what we're learning to another person. If we're able to teach it in our own words to another person in a way that helps them to understand it, then it suggests that we have learned it and understand it well ourselves. And I would encourage you to do that, to share things that you are learning with someone else who doesn't necessarily know about that topic, and see if you can explain it in a way that makes sense to them. When you're able to do that, when you're able to take what you're learning and put it in your own words in that way, it's a good indication that you are learning effectively, and it ought to help you in remembering what you are learning. So in review, we can ask ourselves the question, what is the best way to retain new information? And what we are suggesting, and these suggestions are based on science in the area of memory. We need to think actively as we read, and part of thinking actively involves asking ourselves questions and seeing if we can answer them. We need to rehearse what we're learning, that is, go over it, time and again in a spaced out sort of way. And to be able to relate our ideas to what we are learning in meaningful ways so it makes sense to us and we can relate it to what we already know and to our own life experience. The final topic that I would like to spend some time on with you is memory storage. How do we store information in our brain so that we can use that information to help ourselves in the many ways in which we do so? And we will even look at changes that go on at the level of the neuron when memories are created in our brain. One aspect of our memory that to me is truly amazing is that we have no real limit to our long-term memory storage capacity. To me, this is incredible. We can learn new things throughout our entire lives, and we never run out of space to store that information. Now, as it turns out, explicit and implicit memories are processed and stored in our brain in different ways. If you recall from our earlier discussion about the two systems of memory, the two systems that exist, one on a conscious track and the other on an unconscious track, explicit memory, which exists on a conscious track, and implicit on an unconscious track. You recall that there are two kinds of explicit memories, semantic and episodic. Semantic memories are memories for factual information, like what is the capital of North Carolina? And episodic memories are memories of personal experiences we have. If you went to your senior prom, if you got to have one, what was it like? Explicit memories are processed in our hippocampus. They're temporarily stored there, not permanently. The hippocampus is sometimes referred to as a loading dock for memories, where the memories just go there at first and for a little bit, and then they are processed and eventually stored in the cortex of our brain, the outer layers of our brain, mainly in the frontal lobes, but not just there. So when we're sleeping is when this communication seems to be going on primarily between the hippocampus and the cortex, as memories are being created and then stored in our brain. Here we can see a picture showing us this process where you can see the hippocampus there, this orange area, the little seahorses, where this process of what's called memory consolidation is taking place. And a lot of that is going on when we're sleeping, when that information is then communicated to the cortex of our brain, where memories are permanently stored. Remember the case of HM that we talked about earlier? HM lost the hippocampus on both sides of his brain as a result of surgery. And if you recall, he lost his ability to form explicit memories after that surgery took place. So this process of memories migrating for storage from the hippocampus to the cortex, the frontal lobes of the brain primarily, is, as I said before, is called memory consolidation. This happens in large part when we're sleeping, so a good night's sleep helps to promote memory consolidation. Researchers using brain recording methods have been able to look at how this communication is going on between the hippocampus and the cortex in the evening when we're sleeping. It's pretty cool, how this occurs when we're asleep at night. Implicit memories, memories that occur on an unconscious track in our brain, involve different structures in the processing and storage of implicit memories. These structures include the cerebellum, which, if you recall, is at the base of your brain about the size of a baseball, and it's important with balance, but it's also important in the processing and storage of memories of classically conditioned experiences. The basal ganglia, which are structures deep in your brain, are involved in the processing and storage of skill memories that involve muscle memory, motor activity, physical skills that we develop. In the case of HM, a skill he was able to learn, a physical skill, after his surgery was how to trace a star while looking in a mirror. His basal ganglia were still intact, allowing him to be able to learn and remember this skill as an implicit memory, unconscious kind of memory. Have you ever had an experience before that was so emotional for you in either a positive way or a negative way? It was such a dramatic kind of experience that you had that it's very vivid, and it's one that you can easily recall and will probably always remember. These kinds of memories are referred to as flashbulb memories. It's like a flash going off in a camera, and it captures that picture, and it could be captured forever. And that's how it is with flashbulb memories. And researchers believe that what may be occurring when we have these kinds of very vivid memories that we can recall many years later is that there's a heightened physiological arousal that occurs in our bodies, and that affects brain functioning as well in a way that tends to stamp in these memories even more strongly. And the activation of the autonomic nervous system and also the amygdala, which is a part of the limbic system, if you recall, seems to be involved in the creation of these flashbulb memories. So I'd like to ask you to think about perhaps events in your own life. They could be positive events or negative events that really stand out for you, that are very easy for you to remember. These may well be examples of flashbulb memories that you have because of the salience of the events that occurred at the time and how they activated your autonomic nervous system and your amygdala, produced increased stress hormones, and these kinds of things that seem to help to stamp in the memories even more strongly. In this picture of the brain, we can see some of the structures that we've been talking about. In the case of explicit memory, one of the things we said is that the hippocampus is like a loading dock where memories temporarily reside there. And through this process of memory consolidation, they are then eventually sent on to the cortex and the frontal lobes of the brain, where they are stored in long-term memory. Here's the amygdala that we associated with flashbulb memories, it being more activated, the emotional processor of our brain when those flashbulb memories occur. And then in thinking about implicit memories, we take a look at the cerebellum here that's involved in the processing and storage of memories associated with classical conditioning experiences. And then the basal ganglia, these structures deep in the brain that are involved with skill memories. Let's take a look now at what occurs at the level of the neuron itself when memories are created. As it turns out, there are changes that go on both inside neurons and between neurons as new memories are being created and stored in our brain. And we have these complex networks of neurons that hold these memories for us. And when we are able to recall something, we access those neurons. They fire, they communicate with one another, and it allows us to recall the memory. Of course, we're talking about, you know, millions and millions of neurons that are communicating with one another and that have undergone changes, allowing these memories to be formed and stored in our brain. Like we said at the very beginning of our discussion of memory, it's an amazing process. It's a God thing for me to think about how we can be so wonderfully made that our memories, which are is so complex in terms of what's going on in our brain, are possible. These researchers, Kandel and Swartz, they, in an effort to study what's going on at the level of the neuron, they picked an animal, a creature, that has really big neurons. It's a sea slug, a very primitive creature. And they studied what happens in the brain of the sea slug when memory is taking place. And they chose a classical conditioning paradigm to study this process. What they did was they shocked the sea slug, causing it to retract its gills. So the shock was the unconditioned stimulus, retracting its gills was the unconditioned response. Then they squirted water on the sea slug and shocked the sea slug. And they did this a number of times. And of course, every time the sea slug got shocked, it retracted its gills. Well, eventually, just squirting the water on the sea slug alone caused it to retract its gills. In other words, the sea slug had been taught to retract its gills when squirted with water. So this was an acquired response through classical conditioning. So then they looked at what was going on with the neurons in the sea slug when this learning was taking place. And there are different neurotransmitters that are involved in the forming of memories, in the communication between neurons that helps new memories to be created. And the one they were looking at in the sea slug was serotonin. And they actually found that the neurons made changes in how they communicated with one another in order for this learning process to take place. New synaptic connections were created. The synapses communicated more efficiently with one another. As networks of neurons were making new and more connections in order for the memories to be created in the little sea slug's nervous system of this learning that had transpired. Well, with us, our brains are much, much more complex, and a similar process occurs. There's a name for it, and it's called long-term potentiation. And it refers to an increase in a synapse's firing potential. Remember, the synapse is a space between two neurons that researchers believe is the neural, meaning the physical basis for learning and memory. Researchers have found that if you teach an organism something new and you send an electric current through the nervous system immediately after being taught something new, it prevents the learning to become a memory, to be remembered. If you disrupt the process with an electric current before the long-term potentiation has taken place. But if you wait a while once an organism has learned something new and you shock their brain, they can still remember it because it happened after long-term potentiation took place. In the case of a treatment that's still used for depression, electroconvulsive shock therapy, it has been found that people who receive this treatment tend to have more difficulty remembering things that occurred around the time that they received their treatment. And this would make sense thinking about long-term potentiation and the possible disruption of it, through the actual ECT treatment itself. In the case of the disease Alzheimer's that primarily affects older adults, as you may be aware, a structure in the brain that's affected by Alzheimer's disease is the hippocampus. And the hippocampus has rich concentrations of neurons that respond to the neurotransmitter acetylcholine. Acetylcholine is a neurotransmitter that's also been found to be important in the LTP process, long-term potentiation process, as new memories are being created and stored in our brain. When people develop Alzheimer's disease, there is death of neurons, sadly. And one of the areas where that takes place is in the hippocampus, and it involves these acetylcholine neurons. So as a result, eventually a person with Alzheimer's disease is going to have difficulty making new memories. They may be able to remember things that happened years ago because their brain was working fine when those memories were created and stored. But now it's hard for them to remember things that happened just a little while ago because they're lacking neurons in their hippocampus, and they're not able to make new memories like you or I can, that are, as we know, temporarily stored in the hippocampus, and then they are sent on to the cortex of the brain for long-term storage. This completes our discussion about memory. Thank you.